for life.
Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome to the PKU Association of Ireland International PKU Day celebrations. We're absolutely delighted to have you join us here this evening. We're going to start this evening by looking at the history of the PKU diet with Professor and author Anne Green, who's going to speak to us about Sheila, unlocking the treatment for PKU.
Well, I hope everyone can hear me. I'm delighted to be here as part of your celebrations of International PKU Day. I'm speaking from just outside Birmingham, and I want to share the story of Sheila Jones, a story I'm sure that some of you know very well, others may not so well. But I want to share particularly the Irish connection and tell you the family story. The story starts, it revolves around, I'm sorry, but the slides aren't moving, Jordan. Oh, there we go. I hope everyone can see now, a slide of Birmingham Children's Hospital. This is the hospital where all the work took place in 1951 to prepare the very first diet for PKU in the world. The hospital has since moved to another site in 1998, but this is where the work took place in 1951. The story starts in Ireland and in County Leitrim, which I'm sure many of you know very well. I'm hoping to visit there one day in the near future. And here in the centre of County Leitrim is a place, do excuse my pronunciation, of Polboy in the centre of County Leitrim, near to Manor Hamilton. This was a farming, and probably still is, a farming community, and Sheila's mother was born here. Mary Margaret Rooney was born in this farmstead. Sorry, it's not working again. Oh, there we are. She was born in 1917 to this farming family. Her parents were Patrick Rooney and Katie McHugh, and she was the eldest of 6 children. At around 16 years of age, we understand she went to Dublin to work, as we call in service, with a family. And then in around 1942, during World War II, she came to England alone. She was around 25 years old at that stage, for work. She came to this large city, Birmingham, of around 1 million people, which was significantly damaged during World War II. And she came to a suburb called Selly Oak. Again, it's not working. Oh, there we go. Which had been significantly damaged during the war, but she obtained lodgings in Selly Oak and had a job at the local car factory in Longbridge, which the yellow arrow there shows the location of her. I know you won't be able to read anything here, but I just wanted to show you that this was a large city of around 1 million people, and the yellow arrow shows the location of Mary's lodgings, and the blue arrow is the location of the car works. The car works was turned over to become a factory, basically, to produce things for the war, including aircraft, and Mary became a drilling machinist on the assembly line at Longbridge. There we go. This is a picture taken from that same assembly line in 1943. At the end of the war, Mary married to a Birmingham man, Edgar Jones, in 1945, and she had 2 sons, Terry and Trevor. They were in a situation in 1949 when Sheila was born of severe housing shortages, extreme poverty, rationing was still ongoing, and we must remember that the NHS had only just been established in 1948, and there was hardly anything by way of a welfare state. Mary and her 2 boys lived in this ground floor maisonette. This is the building which still stands. I took this photograph a few years ago, and they lived on the ground floor in this maisonette. 2 bedrooms, and the main bedroom was in fact given to lodgers. Mary took in lodgers in order to raise money. So the two boys and herself were just in this small bedroom. Sheila came home to live, sorry, I think we've missed a slide there. Could we go back one? Yes, sorry, next one. It keeps jumping, I'm sorry. Sorry about this. Go back one. That's the one, yeah. Sheila was born in a maternity hospital in Birmingham and came home to live in this maisonette. I think the slide can, oh, there we go. She, at 1 year of age, Mary was worried. She felt that Sheila was not doing the things she should be doing around this age. She was a very unhappy baby. She cried a lot. She had a delay in her sitting and she was unable to stand. She didn't want to play. Her brothers, Terry and Trevor, remember that she was a very disruptive baby. She used to pull things off shelves. She used to cry a lot, and she had a rocking motion and a lot of head banging. Mary was worried, and so she took Sheila to the family doctor, who referred her to Birmingham Children's Hospital. Now, at Birmingham Children's Hospital at this time were three key doctors who all happened to be there working together, and really they were the team that were responsible for developing the first diet for PKU in the world. Evelyn Hickmans was a chemist who had graduated in chemistry at a very early age and had come to Birmingham in 1923 to set up the very first biochemistry laboratory in a children's hospital. John Gerard was a medical doctor. He had been in the army during the war, and after the war he had come to Birmingham to work with Professor Smellie to study paediatrics. And he had set up an outpatient clinic for children with what was then referred to as mental retardation. And then we had a young Dr. Horst Bickel, who had come from Germany in 1949. He had got an interest in amino acids, and amino acids were being undertaken in Dr. Hickman's laboratory. Very unusual and a very rare situation. So he had come there to be able to do a PhD. Sheila was seen in Dr. Gerard's clinic at 17 months of age. She couldn't stand or walk, she could only sit. She had this rocking motion and she had this strange, unusual mouse-like smell, and she had fair hair. They undertook the ferric chloride test, which in those days was really the only test available for PKU. And Mary was asked to bring a specimen of urine, which she duly did in April, and it tested positive. The doctors were understandably very excited by this, and so they asked Mary to bring Sheila back to the hospital in September, where she was admitted, and they undertook further investigations and confirmed her PKU. Now, what did they know about PKU in 1951? Well, they knew that most babies were normal at birth, but they also knew that there soon began to be obvious delays in development, particularly no speech. There was fair hair, there was this odd mouse-like smell, and many of the children were very agitated, aggressive, and some of them had convulsions. At the time, most cases who had been diagnosed with PKU were actually what we referred to as institutionalized. In those days, they were called mental defectives. And it was estimated that there was at least about 1,600 patients in the UK in these large mental hospitals, or asylums as they were often referred to. And they had what we now refer to as severe learning disabilities. And they had this very unfortunate term of idiots applied to them. The majority of them were very low in IQ. Approximately 60% had an IQ of less than 20. Now, there was no treatment for PKU in 1951. The idea of a diet had been suggested. It had been suggested in the 1930s, soon after PKU was described. But it was felt not to be possible. It was felt that it would not be possible to provide a nutritionally adequate diet. But Mary was persistent. She badgered the doctors and demanded treatment. She asked them, "When are you going to treat my child?" And Dr. Bickle describes how he says he couldn't rest on the strength of a fine diagnosis because he was being asked and asked by Mary to provide treatment. This was the stimulus for them to look at what they could possibly do. Now, Dr. Louis Wolfe, who was a chemist at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, had in fact shown that you could remove phenylalanine from dietary protein. He had shared his ideas and discussed them with Dr. Bickle and Dr. Hickmans. He had hoped to be able to try such a diet at Great Ormond Street, but the medical staff there were unhappy about it and wouldn't let him do that. His ideas were shared with Dr. Bickle and Dr. Hickmans, and so they set about preparing for the very first time a low phenylalanine diet in the biochemistry laboratory of Dr. Hickmans. Now, the dietary preparation was undertaken using a source of milk protein, or casein, which had been broken down or hydrolyzed. It was provided by a company called Allen and Hanbury's, and it was mixed with acid and passed through this long glass column that you can see here. It's about 3 foot long. This is the original column, or a picture of the original column used to prepare the diet, and it's still in the biochemistry lab at Birmingham Children's Hospital. It's filled with charcoal, and when you pass this acid mix of the hydrolyzed milk protein down the column, it removes certain amino acids, in particular phenylalanine and tyrosine and tryptophan. So they passed this mixture down the column. They then tested for phenylalanine, and then they passed it down the column again, and it was only when it was free of phenylalanine would they then go on to use the resultant mix as the protein source for Sheila's diet. So this was the first phenylalanine-free protein substitute. Dr. Hickmans had in fact got considerable nutrition and dietetic expertise because she had worked in dietetics prior to coming to Birmingham. And so they were very fortunate that they had everything there that they needed to produce a diet. They started the diet in the November. Very quickly they produced enough diet in the laboratory for Sheila. And using this, they started the diet in hospital for Sheila and continued from the November until March 1952. Her phenylalanine levels fell. Her urine ferric chloride test became negative. And it was difficult to be sure, but there was some suggestion of some improvements. She seemed quieter, she seemed more content, stopped head banging, and the nurses on the ward felt she was livelier and more interested in things. And it was then felt time that she could go home. Mary could take Sheila home. The diet production continued in the laboratory day in, day out, in order to produce enough of this for Sheila, who was clearly now growing. The flat where the Jones family lived was where this yellow arrow is, on the southwest side of the city, and the hospital was just to the on the southeast side of the city, and the hospital was just to the southwest side, a few miles. And Mary had to go on the bus to the centre of Birmingham and then back out on the bus, another bus, to the hospital. And she had to do this every week with Sheila to collect enough diet for the following week, and for Sheila to be examined by the doctors, and for them on some occasions to take blood and urine for testing. This was the first time they were worried about what they were doing, and they needed to see her regularly. So after this 4 months, she'd gone home, and her brothers Terry and Trevor remember going with Mary on the bus to the hospital, sometimes with Sheila, sitting in the waiting room while Sheila went in to see the doctors. And the diet was put into a large, very heavy, dark glass bottle, as you see here. This is a bottle that is used in the laboratory to store acids. And Mary would carry this home every week with enough of this protein substitute for Sheila. Her brothers remember how difficult it was for Sheila to take the diet. Could you just go back one, Jordan, please? And they describe it as awful stuff like tar. And can you imagine Mary having to give this to Sheila every day? The next slide, yeah. The effect of the diet was difficult to measure. There were no formal IQ tests available, no formal assessments of development. Mary said Sheila was more lively, she played more, she was more interested in her surroundings, and the doctors noticed that her hair went dark. She began to have eye contact, she smiled, and she began to walk. But she was still significantly what they call mentally backward, and it was difficult to assess. Was this something that would have happened anyway? Was this something that was happening because she was getting more attention? And in order to justify continuing this diet, they needed to be certain that there were some benefits. It was difficult to make, it was expensive, and most of all, they were concerned about were they doing any harm nutritionally over a long period of time. And then, of course, importantly, it was important to prove, because how could they justify giving it to other children until they were certain it was a benefit? So what they decided to do was challenge Sheila with some phenylalanine, to add phenylalanine back to the mixture so that it would mimic what she would be getting in a normal diet, to see if there was any adverse effect. They decided not to tell Mary about this. Obviously, this is something that would not happen today, but they felt at the time that this was something that would be better to do because it would avoid any bias if Mary knew what was happening. Mary went home with her large black bottle jar with the diet, unknowing that there was this extra phenylalanine in. She gave it to Sheila, and only 6 days later, she came back to the hospital, querying a mistake. What had happened? Sheila had gone back to her previous state before she started the diet. The doctors quickly visited the home to confirm the findings. The 2 lodgers also said there had been a marked change in Sheila's behaviour. And so she was promptly put back onto the phenylalanine reduced diet. And she was soon back to her normal self on that diet. Having explained all this then to Mary Jones about what had happened, they asked to repeat all this in hospital so that they could monitor the biochemistry of what was happening, and also they could film Sheila in order to prove the adverse effect of the phenylalanine. Mary clearly must have understood the importance of this, the importance of proving it, as to how this was then going to go forward for the future. I'm sure many of you will have seen the YouTube film of this trial, of this challenge. I've not included it this evening, but suffice it to say that it was very obvious of the adverse effect that phenylalanine did. And so she was then put back onto the phenylalanine reduced diet and went back to how she had been. Next slide, please. This is Sheila in 1952, captured on the Dr. Bickle video, walking with the aid of a chair. And then a couple of years later, a further film was done showing her playing here with a top and a ball, and then with sitting on her mum's knee, building a brick tower. So this was really important evidence, and the world's first, showing that a phenylalanine low diet could improve things. Sheila then continued at home with further progress in her development, but as she grew, it became very difficult to keep the dietary control. This was an absolutely awful mixture, far worse than anything that then began to be produced commercially. And at the age of 6 years, in 1955, the doctors transferred her just to a low protein diet because of the difficulties of maintaining this mixture. By 6.5 years, she was making less progress. She was only functioning at around 18 months of age. And Mary was no longer able to maintain the diet for Sheila. She now was living in very poor accommodation in Birmingham, in inner city Birmingham, in one of these back-to-back houses where the houses are literally built round a courtyard with communal facilities for laundry and toilets. This is a picture of Mary here on the right with her son Terry, and they lived in this back-to-back house for many years. It only had 1 bedroom and an attic room, and by now Mary had got 4 sons as well as Sheila. Mary sadly had a mental breakdown and had to seek treatment for herself, and it became clear that she could no longer look after Sheila at home. It was a credit to her that she had looked after Sheila for so long. Sheila, at the age of 9 years, was therefore admitted to one of these large mental institutions on the outskirts of Birmingham. This top picture here shows an old ward block, the type that Sheila she would live. It was a self-contained community. It was a church, and the bottom left here there is a picture of the recreation hall where Sheila would have various activities. She was cared for here, and Mary visited after she had recovered, which she did from her own mental breakdown. Mary visited every month to see Sheila. Sadly, next slide please. I should say Mary very much wanted Sheila to come home, and so there was a visit home in 1963 when Sheila was 13. Here she is with her 2 younger brothers. Sheila was very strong-willed, never spoke, and it was extremely difficult to look after her, and Mary only had this 1-bedroom back-to-back house, and it was just not possible for her to have Sheila at home. So sadly she went back to Chelmsley. Mary continued to visit until she unfortunately died in 1981, age 64. Sheila then continued to be looked after by very caring staff at Chelmsley Hospital, and did in fact have lots of fun times in spite of the difficult circumstances. But she herself died when she was almost 50 years of age, and is buried here in Birmingham. So that is the story of Sheila Jones, and really the story of Mary Rooney. Mary had become a single mother. Sorry, I think I omitted to say that early on. Her marriage broke up, and lived in extreme poverty with huge family hardship. But it was her persistence that ensured that a diet was developed for her daughter Sheila. It was her courage that allowed the treatment to go ahead and allowed the phenylalanine challenge. And without that, I don't know when it would have been developed. So we owe a huge amount to Mary. There's a great sadness that Sheila herself couldn't benefit longer term, but there is a family pride that what they have done to contribute to the treatment for PKU, and above all, the legacy that they have left for others. Next slide, please. Soon after the challenge had been published, commercial diets began to be produced, dietetic services started to be developed, and it became recognised that early diagnosis was absolutely critical for the best outcome for those with PKU. And so the case for newborn screening was made, And really all this happened very rapidly during the late 1950s and the early 1960s. So this is the legacy that Sheila and Mary have left. In the department at Birmingham Children's Hospital, there is a small plaque dedicated to the memory of Sheila Jones. And I'm pleased to report that the hospital is going to put another more significant plaque in the main hospital dedicated to Sheila and Mary to celebrate their contribution to the PKU diet, and that is hopefully going to be happening this year. So all that remains for me to do is to say thank you to people who've helped, in particular the clinical chemistry department at the Children's Hospital and the medical director there, but also to Sheila's brothers here who have visited the hospital, and I've put a photograph of Sheila up in the laboratory because without their help and memories and photographs, I think it would have been difficult to put this story together. If any of you are interested in learning any more about this story, then perhaps I could refer you to the book that I have written, which is available and tells the much fuller story of Sheila and Mary Jones. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anne. That is an amazing presentation. I think for so many, when they read the story and they learn about Sheila Jones even more, you know, that it'll really resonate with them how much we owe them, and to build on their legacy, to continue to improve the lives for people with PKU. It's only through Mary's persistence, like you said, that's really made it, you know, a reality for so many of us to be able to have a treatment for PKU. And we could be living with a completely different reality if it were not for dietary therapy. So I think I'm joined tonight by the PKU community in expressing our absolute gratitude to somebody who came from rural County Leitrim in Ireland, who played an absolutely pivotal part in supporting our community. And I think we owe it to them to build on this legacy and continue to improve the lives for people living with PKU. Thank you so much. I'm not seeing many questions in the chat just yet. It's a sign of a very good presentation. I do have a question for you, and that is, in the case of Sheila Jones, at what stage did she completely come off diet, or did they continue to give her dietary therapy in residential care for some time? I've often wondered.
Yeah, no, what happened was basically Mary really couldn't maintain the diet at home. The information is quite scanty, but she ceased to be looked after in terms of any hospital appointments really when she moved to this back-to-back house in the late 1950s. She was then lost to follow-up, I have to say. There are no records that say what happened. The records at the Chelmsley Hospital when she was admitted did not refer to the fact that she had PKU, which is quite remarkable, because I would have thought that perhaps Mary would mention it, but you have to remember that very little was known about it, and the people there would not know about PKU in 1959 probably. So there was further reference to it later on, and there were attempts to put her on a phenylalanine reduced diet much later on, but quite frankly it was not possible. She didn't tolerate it, and it was felt that it was not a reasonable thing to do, so she never went back onto a diet.
Yeah. Thank you. I see some questions coming through now. There's one from Karen Willits here at the PKU Association of Ireland, thanking you for your presentation. An amazing story. When Sheila was being treated, apart from the tar-like protein substitute, is there any information on what else she was given to eat?
Yes, if Jordan could possibly go to my, I'm sorry, I'm a bit hampered by not having the control of it, but if Jordan could possibly go to my presentation and just scan down the slides, if that's possible. There is a photograph of the diet that was published in 1954 when Dr. Bickle and Gerard published the results of the trial. Have you got any luck with that, Jordan?
Just pulling it back up here 1 second.
Yeah. Basically, she had this mixture, which was disgusting. Was, if you just, that's it, super, back one, yeah. She had 100 mils. If you see there at 8 a.m., she had a gluten-free wheat flour in water. She had 100 mils of milk, and that was her phenylalanine allowance. Okay. She then had 100 mils of this mixture, and then later on at 6 p.m. you'll see there's another 100 mils. So she had 200 mils of this product every day. Between that, and apart from the milk that she was allowed, she had fruit and vegetables, orange juice. She was given multivitamins. This diet was devised in conjunction with the paediatricians then, and Evelyn Hickmans, who was quite knowledgeable on the nutrition side. So, but that was it. Yeah. But the difficulties in giving the actual product, her brothers say it was just that she hated it and it was just awful. But Mary persisted in doing it. Does that answer your question? I hope so.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I take some relief in knowing that she actually ate regular type foods, that there was some enjoyment in her diet.
Yes.
You know, and many adults and children today, of course, they do, you know, find adherence very difficult. But when you think how far dietary therapy has come, like we are grateful. I know there's room for improvement, but absolutely. There was another question in the chat asking if Sheila Jones, if there were any other members of her family that had PKU or any of descendants.
No, interestingly, our 4 brothers, only one of them has got children, and they theoretically could be carriers or could have PKU if his wife had been a carrier, but they're not. But interestingly, I think it's right in saying that his daughter, her brother-in-law, has got PKU, and nothing to do with that family. It's quite interesting. So no, the short answer is there's nobody else in the family in Birmingham. Yeah.
There are other comments coming through. Amazing story of courage by Mary Rooney. Thank you, Anne. Thank you for your presentation. Greetings there from Italy, from a patient, a PKU patient advocate in Italy as well. Thanking you. So emotional, and happy International PKU Day. If there are no more questions, I think we'll move on to the next part of our presentation. And this is where we would like to take time to recognize the contribution of a very valuable member of the PKU Association of Ireland. It is our former chairperson, Mr. Fergus Woodcock, who's joining us this evening. We're so incredibly grateful to Fergus. He's been a phenomenal support to the PKU community, and on the occasion of International PKU Day, on behalf of the PKU community here in Ireland, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to Fergus, our former chairperson, for his time and commitment to our association over the past 18 years. So he's a legacy for our association. He has donated so much of his time, and we're incredibly grateful to you, Fergus. Thank you so much. And we would not be where we are today without you and without your support, and for the support of voluntary members of our community who dedicate their time, such as yourself. And we'd like to thank you. And earlier this week, Fergus was presented with some Waterford Crystal from the PKU Association of Ireland for his work. So I'm going to invite Fergus now just to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette. And thank you, everybody in the association, for your kind gift. It was a long journey that we've had, and it's probably going to be even longer going forward. We've achieved so much within the PKU Association, but I really would say to people who are out there and listening, it won't achieve as much as it could achieve unless everybody gets behind the PKU Association, gets involved, even just do a little bit. If you have an issue, if you think of something, then get involved, write a few letters, and without patient power, nothing will happen. And that was when the association was formed. I remember talking to a member of staff in Temple Street who was very involved in setting up the association. They said the time will come when we'll be looking for something for PKU, and the only way you get it is with an advocacy group like the PKU Association of Ireland, who shout, hassle their TDs, hassle the minister and everything else, because without that kind of work, nothing will happen going forward. So I'd say to everybody out there, parents of young children, adults, the adult clinic at the moment is very badly staffed, understaffed, and without adult PKU people shouting and asking for more help, nothing will happen. So I just say to the members out there, get involved, and thank you very much for your gift. Back to you, Bernadette.
Thank you very much, Fergus, and thank you for those kind words and for all your work to date. We really appreciate you. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next part of our presentation now, and this is where we recorded an interview with a very famous young lady in our community. Her name is Lola, and Lola has recently started a new medication called Kuvan, and she's very excited about it and to tell us her story. So we're going to share the video with you now, and we'll leave some questions for afterwards. Thank you.
Okay.
We're not hearing it, Jordan. We just need volume there.
Yeah.
Sorry, just 1 second.
Hi Lola, hi Hazel. We're absolutely delighted to be joined by you this afternoon to talk about your experience of Kuvan. So I'm going to start with you, Lola. Will you tell me about the first time you heard about Kuvan?
So we were up in the Temple Street Hospital, and the nurse was telling us about these new medicines, and she was saying there was this drug called Kuvan, and that it could bring down, it would help my liver to function how it's supposed to. And I was a bit, I didn't know if I should try it, because I heard about the side effects of it and I was a bit nervous to try it. So I thought I'll give it a go, and I'm so happy I did.
What are you most happy about?
Being able to have normal things, like being able to have pasta, especially.
Oh, wow. And tell me, how many exchanges are you on now compared to what you were on?
When I was, before Kuvan, I was on 4 exchanges, and now I'm on 17.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're really lucky because you've got one part of your genes are actually working really well that enables you to be able to do that. So that's really, really great for somebody with classical PKU, and it's really exciting. So Mom, do you think in terms of the change with PKU and Kuvan now, how have things changed for you as a family? Where do you see the most impact?
It's just changed absolutely everything. It's completely changed her life. It's unreal. I mean, you know yourself, to have 4 exchanges is so severe and so strict. You know, you're constantly worried if you get caught out somewhere, what are you going to give them to eat if they've used so many exchanges already? It's just, I mean, it's 4 times, it's over 4 times her, you know, her exchanges before she had the Kuvan. So it's revolutionized everything. It's amazing. It really is. It's just for all of us, you know. I mean, we love to go out as a family to eat, and we have no worries anymore. Oh my God, can she have this? Can she have a chip? Can she, you know, it's fantastic. It's really incredible.
What about the range of different foods she can have now? Do you find she has more healthier options, or?
100%. What I found with the PKU diet, and you know yourself as a PKU mother, you have to give it to them, but some of the stuff doesn't seem to be the healthiest. It may not be what you would choose to give your other children who don't have PKU, but you are stuck, especially on 4 exchanges. Lola, there's a lot of the stuff Lola wouldn't have kind of been overly fond of, you know, some of those kind of packety sausage mixes and stuff, just they feel very artificial. I know they're fantastic for some people, and you know they're very good for filling up, but she wasn't overly fond of them. We relied an awful lot on pasta, an awful lot on bread. I found since she's tried the Kuvan, we're far more, you know, kind of more natural, normal kind of foods. You know, she even had an egg one day. You know, the egg was a huge, she loved it, but she was absolutely stuffed after the egg. And it's you know, the proof that she's never had so much protein kind of in one sitting. It's you know, with 7 exchanges, just with the normal bread. She still likes her PKU bread. Her favorite would be the low profile rolls. Or the Promin fresh bread. She had that toasted and sliced up with the egg. But we have tried a few, maybe gluten-free because they're not as high, but she's quite happy with her own bread. So we stick with it, you know, and we use the exchanges on other things. She loves ham. She has a slice of ham now with her lunch every day in school. So yeah, it's a huge, huge
What's it like for you, Lola, now having ham in your sandwich? Is it different for you?
Yeah, when the first day I went to school, my friend, I showed her the ham in my sandwich, and she told me that she went home to her mum and she was bouncing around the kitchen because she was so happy that I could have it.
Fantastic. I know, I'd say your friends are really, really delighted for you, are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
And tell me, what was it like when you first heard that you could start Kuvan? So did you have to go into the hospital, and what actually happened?
So in February, I was told that I could go into the hospital and take my first dose of it. So we went in on February the 1st into St. Bridget's ward, and we spent 2 nights there, and I had, I think, 2 doses of Kuvan.
Yeah, you had 2, one each day.
Yeah. And when they said that they'd, over a couple of weeks, that they'd give us a phone call if I responded to it. And my mum got the phone call, and she ran into my room to tell me, and I was so happy. I was crying, and my dad was in bed because I think he was working nights, and we ran into my dad's room and into their room, and I woke him up, and he was like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "It worked. I responded." And we went down to the pharmacy to get
That's something to really celebrate on International PKU Day, you know, and that's what this is all about. It's a celebration, and we're so happy for you that it worked out for you. Would you have any advice for other boys and girls who might be starting out on Kuvan? Have you any tricks or tips for them?
Don't lose hope if your exchanges aren't going up straight away. Your body has to get used to having the tablets. So keep trying with it, and you'll be fine.
Do you take many tablets every day?
I take 5 in the morning and 5 in the night, so I'd be having 10 tablets a day.
And are they easy to take? You don't mind taking them by the sounds of it?
No,
small,
they're small. They're about that size.
How about you, Mom? Do you have any advice for families starting off on Kuvan?
It's definitely very scary because obviously you're not just brought into the hospital for weeks. Before that, you have to build up their levels, basically. So you have to put their levels out of range, which is kind of hard to do because we've spent so long keeping them in range. So then there's also the fear of giving her new stuff, you know, while you're building it up, and then thinking, what if she doesn't respond? She'll never have that again. You just have to do it and just kind of stick with it, I suppose, basically. And it's not, everyone isn't going to respond. It's really, really sad. But the thing is, there's so many new treatments coming now, just not to lose hope, because there really will be something for everybody at some stage. And hopefully, even if something for everybody, I would feel strongly that if we could get more funding for new companies to come in with the low protein foods. Because, you know yourself, if you look online, if you see in America, if you see a lot in Europe, they have a huge selection. Now, I know we are absolutely blessed with the care we get here, but it would be lovely because it's something that everybody, regardless of whether they respond, whether they don't respond, it's something for everybody in the PKU community, you know, just a little bit extra, you know, choice really. That's what I would love to see.
I would say anybody watching this video today is just absolutely overjoyed to hear about your experience. And we're absolutely delighted, you know, and the PKU Association and our members are delighted that people are finally gaining access, you know, and Temple Street staff, of course, have been hugely supportive, and we're so grateful to each and every one of them as well. But as a community, I'd say everyone is celebrating with you today, Lola, and they're so incredibly happy that everything's worked out for you. Thank you so much for joining us. And is there anything else, any final messages that you'd like to make? Or
just to say thank you, Bernadette, to the PKU Association, because they fought so hard for the Kuvan along with everybody in Temple Street, because without you, we wouldn't have it now. And Lola's life is just, it's changed beyond all recognition. It's fantastic. Really, really is. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you too. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your experience, because without people sharing their experience, we would be at a loss as well. And thank you for your support.
Thanks, Bernadette.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. That was a fabulous interview there with Lola. I tell you, she's an absolute natural on camera, with a lovely smile and everything. There's some comments coming through there for Lola, thanking you for, you know, sharing your experience. And somebody actually commented as well that you'd make a great future advocate for PKU. You're a good speaker and politely confident. Well done, Lola. Thank you so much, Lola, and to her mom for sharing your story. This comes from another mom. Well done, Lola, from somebody else. So PKU community are right behind you, and they're so delighted that you take the time to share your experience. And we acknowledge that everybody's experience of PKU, everyone's perspective is different. But thank you so much for sharing yours. I have a question in the chat, and it's for Lola and Hazel. What has been the biggest difference in terms of taking Kuvan over just foods you're eating? Do you feel fuller from food, for example, the egg, or have more energy? And huge thanks to you for sharing.
What do you think?
Today we went out for lunch, and normally I would just be having chips, and I'd have more chips than usual. But today I tried chicken tenders for the first time, and they were really, really nice. And I felt so full, I could barely finish them.
She just ate one, so
I could only eat one. There's three there.
She's definitely fuller. It feels far more natural. She's not eating, you know, she's not stuffing herself with pasta. Was kind of what she lived on before. So it's definitely her choices, you know, like even just the sandwiches, having the ham in the sandwich or a toasted sandwich with ham. She definitely is fuller. I definitely noticed that.
Very good. Thank you for sharing. So I don't think we've any other questions other than lots of comments coming through, thanking you for sharing your experience, and well done to you. So we're going to move on to the next stage of our event tonight, and that is we're going to have a little panel discussion, an informal chat with our wonderful staff from Temple Street. We could do nothing without them. They're fantastic. This evening we have Metabolic Nurse Manager, we have Maria Regan, which many people watching in tonight will be very familiar with, and of course Maria Irranca, who is a Senior Dietitian as well in the Metabolic unit that you're all probably hugely familiar with also. We're so grateful to you and your work. I'm going to start with you, Maria Regan, and just ask you to tell us about the history of PKU in Ireland and how did it all actually begin?
Hi, Bernadette. First of all, I would really like to say thank you for inviting me to join you this evening, because it's such a lovely event so far. Lola is just fab. We've always said it, and all our kids that come into us. I mean, I suppose we're very lucky that we have the opportunity to watch these children grow from small babies that we meet with families on the first day, and then you get to watch them grow up and do everything they're supposed to do and be so articulate, so wonderful as Lola is. So thank you for inviting me to join you. I suppose, you know, following on from Anne's story with Sheila, in 1966, Ireland became the first country in the world to introduce a national newborn screening program. Now, obviously, there was newborn screening in some states in America and in other parts of different countries, but Ireland was the first to have a national newborn screening program. And that started with Dr. Doreen Murphy, who was within the clinic at the time, went to, I believe it was Lisbon, to a meeting and heard about the kit that was available for diagnosing PKU. And so she brought it back, lobbied the government to start a newborn screening program. And we did. And we would have a cohort of patients that do, for most part, live in residential care who would have been born pre-screening, like Sheila. But 1966 changed the whole project of PKU. It changed the history of it. It changed the expectations for people with PKU. And Dr. Doreen Murphy worked with PKU from then on. And it was she who really, first started to articulate the real need for diet for life, and saw the reasoning behind staying on diet right through your life cycle, right into adulthood. Dr. Nocton took over in the late 1980s. And at the time, it would have been a small team. It was one consultant, one dietitian, one nurse, and they worked out of a small port cabin. And over the years, funding improved. And ironically enough, it was 1999, the year that I've just found out that Sheila passed away. In 1999, a major amount of financing came into the metabolic unit, and that funded for increased staffing. It was the first nurse specialist post that was actually funded, and it was only the third nurse specialist post within Temple Street Hospital. Prior to that, there was a nurse in infection control and in the neurology department. So it was really one of the very first units to start looking at diversifying and seeing other ways of giving care to patients other than the normal, just the medical route. So in 2000, sorry, I don't know if my camera is kind of coming in and out of it. In 1993, St. Bridget's ward was opened, and it was the first ward dedicated to the care of children with metabolic conditions entirely, not just PKU. And following on in 94, the metabolic unit that everybody would be familiar with now, the outpatients department, was developed. 2004 saw the first nurse dietitian-led clinic. And again, this was a new venture, a new look at how best to provide care for the families. And really one of the key things behind that was to have a stability and a continuity of care, that you weren't just meeting someone different every time you came, that you were meeting the same staff. And something really important in the development of that clinic was for people to understand that, one, the consultants remained very much involved in the care provided and the outcomes for our children, and how things developed within their care. But also that there's always a doctor available during those clinics if somebody would like their child seen by the doctor. So it was developed, I think, with the idea of giving patients a more continuity of care, but there was still that structure behind it of consultants, management, etc. 2005 saw the international study into Kuvan and the Kuvan management. And it was really looking at, Kuvan is also called BH4, and it has been used to treat a different form of PKU. And over the years of using it in that situation, other units had seen the benefit of it to patients with classical PKU, or what we would call, the one we would see commonly in Ireland. And that we took part in that in 2005. And we really started to see that this might be something that would actually benefit some of our patients. Limited probably because of the fact that you really needed to have a fair tolerance of phenylalanine in order for it to benefit you. It was licensed around, I think, 2009, 2010, but unfortunately it was deemed too expensive and not of any great, I suppose, improvement as far as the government bodies were concerned. And so Ireland have stayed behind in relation to the development of Kuvan, or the use of Kuvan. From the hospital point of view, 2012 saw the opening of the adult service in the Mater. And as Fergus spoke about earlier, that has been slow in development. It has been difficult to get, you know, sufficient staff and funding for staff in order for them to be able to take over to the point of what maybe Temple Street has in relation to the children's development of services. And that's something that is still a work very much in progress. Over the years, different things have changed. I suppose in 1966, the screening would have been what we would call a quantitative chemical process. Now it is much more streamlined, it is much more up to date, and we now have a qualitative system within the laboratory where you get an actual figure. So initially it would have been a positive or a negative in 1966. Now we actually get a number. So the phenylalanine level is actually quantifiable. And that is really good information when you're talking to a new family with a baby with PKU. Because if you're talking really high levels, then you're possibly saying, okay, you know, this is sort of telling us very, very small amount of, if none at all, enzyme activity. If you have a lower level, possibility that you have some enzyme activity. And this is now very important to us in relation to the idea of whether or not Kuvan might work for you. Other developments over the years have been the introduction of the PKU Association. And really, I think, as Fergus said earlier, it's the partnership, it's the working together, it's having the patient and family voice, it's having the medical and professionals' voices, and it's working together in order to lobby for the best way forward for our patients. And we are lucky in some ways. We have the long-term illness card, you know, your diet is paid for life. These are all very positive, but that doesn't mean that we should stand still. And Kuvan is one way where we're definitely starting to see a change in direction from just a one-way street to having, you know, just a few different pathways. Maybe this will work for you. If that doesn't, this will work for you. I think social media has changed how we manage PKU and how we interact with patients and their families. And that's a very positive thing, because we should never underestimate the support services of, you know, you meet with a professional. I could sit with a family, I've sat with many, many families over the years and said, you know, this is a diet that works. Once your child stays on the diet, once we keep your levels within range, your child is going to do well. But there's nothing like hearing it from a family who is going through the same thing, or who's had to go through the terrible twos or the days where they don't want to take their drink, or, you know, the different things that you come up against when you're trying to live a normal family life as well. And I think, you know, I suppose social media can be a positive, it can be a negative, but I think it is something that you at least have the right to opt in and out of. And over the last year and a half, it has become huge to us, you know, with COVID, with the fact of not having, not being able to run, you know, person-to-person clinics as much as we would have before. It has helped us to develop our online and our attend anywhere clinics. And this is probably, I would think, we will be looking at this, but I think this is something that probably a lot of families see a very good advantage in. You don't have to be coming off to Dublin. You don't have to have a whole day off work or off school. You don't have the expense of traveling to Dublin for clinic appointments. I don't think it will ever replace it fully. I think there's always an advantage to coming to the unit at least once a year, you know, and seeing you in person and meeting with the professionals in person. But all these developments, some are accidental, some are necessity, and some is it's just from listening to families and seeing what works, what doesn't. I suppose one of the things we learned as we went through the whole nurse dietitian led clinic was, you know, so we started the clinics, every child attending had PKU. We were probably a little bit too efficient in that you were never really sitting for very long, most days sitting for very long, so you'd be brought straight in and you'd see somebody and you'd go home. And we eventually found out a couple of months later that there were children telling us, I've never met anybody with PKU, yet they were in the clinic. And we thought, okay, all right, we need to do something about this. And from that developed the whole curriculum, the education curriculum, and having little sessions. So when you come to clinic, the children wouldn't just have to sit in a room with a nurse or a dietitian or another professional, but you'd be actually able to sit in a group with your peers, with other children with PKU, and talk about different aspects, learn about how to count exchanges, how to read labels, how to take your drink. And all of these things we've developed over the years. I think the first time that we celebrated International PKU Day as a unit was in 2018, and we actually had our Mad Hatter's Fee party. We got terribly excited. It was I'm sure you'll still see photographs of all the professionals with their hats on and everything. And yeah. And I remember you being at it that day, you know. But I think, again, you know, developments, and you know, you really should never forget the history of PKU. You know, it's where it all started. When you look at as Anne described so beautifully, you know, Sheila's story, Mary's story as a mom, you can just only imagine the frustration and the difficulties in trying to, knowing that your child has a condition and not being able to do anything about it. To now where, you know, that history is in the books. You know, so many of our children are doing so many great things. Some of them are great at sports, some of them are great at music, some of them just love reading, some of them are, you know, they're just in every walk of life. They're doing every activity that's out there. They're not stopped from doing anything. And we get the great pleasure of watching them grow up. We get to watch all of that.
You're
and
fantastic.
I suppose,
yeah, with everything you do, and you've mentioned many points there about relationships, and I think, you know, the relationships between families and Temple Street staff is hugely important in terms of supporting PKU. You know, it's a big part of it, and you do a phenomenal job at that. We should be celebrating that also today. I'm going to move on, but I come back to you for questions, if that's okay. Thank you so much, Maria, for giving us such an in-depth knowledge on how it came about, because it took a while to get to where we are today. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because sometimes we get stuck in a rut, but we need to absolutely, you know, recognize how far we've come. And I'm going to turn to Maria Irranca, a senior dietitian now, to talk to us about how the diet has actually evolved, and also to ask you, Maria, did you expect so many patients to respond to Kuvan to date? Has the response rate been higher than what you would have expected?
Okay, to start off with, I'll just talk a little bit about, I suppose, the diet, and then I'll move on to Kuvan, I think, because I think that's the natural progression, I suppose. So, you know, over the years, we've seen huge changes within the diet, you know, how Anne has described for Sheila, what she had to go through, and thank God, it's not as bad as that now. Although, you know, there are difficulties with the diet. We can never move away from that. You know, anybody who has to follow a diet for life, it is very, very difficult. You know, for some, it's a breeze, but for other kids and other families, it can be very, very difficult. So, you know, anything that makes it easier obviously helps. So improvement in the taste and the palatability of the amino acid formulas obviously helps the availability, and the variety of low protein foods also is essential for families to be able to manage on the diet, particularly if it is very restrictive, like it would have been for Lola when she was, before she started Kuvan, only been on 4 exchanges. And I know certainly for some of my patients that we have some that are only on 2.5 exchanges per day. So you can imagine that, you know, protein, the exchanges are only a minuscule part of the diet. And the main part of the diet is all the low protein, whether they're manufactured or whether they're naturally occurring in the diet. These are the things that are so important to each and every one of the families. So it is important to have a good and wide variety of those foods. And I just wanted to say that, you know, us putting Kuvan aside, I mean, diet has been a very, very successful treatment for PKU for over 50 years. And we mustn't go, you know, take away from that. You know, we have families, you know, some of our older families that have children that were born pre-screening and have children then that were born post-screening. So they see the difference that diet had on their families. You know, some of their children ended up in institutions because they couldn't manage them at home. And then they had children that were born after 1966, and they were put on diet and they were able to develop normally. You know, and that's huge for those families. lots of our later families obviously have never seen any of that, but you know, it's only something they might have read in a book or have been told about. So, you know, the diet has been life-changing for so many families within Ireland, and because of the small gene pool, we do have quite a high incidence of PKU within Ireland. So, you know, worldwide, I think it's 1 in every 10,000 births, but in Ireland, it's 1 in every 4,500 births. So, you know, we have quite a high incidence. And if I'm right, Bernadette, the year that your daughter was born, I think we had 23 patients diagnosed with PKU. Whereas normally we would have in the region of about 12 a year positive. So that was a particular bumper year. And if I'm right, I think Celine, I think you all know Celine, one of our other nurse specialists. I think she went on annual leave for 2 weeks. Am I right, Maria? And in the space of being away for 2 weeks, we had something like 6 new diagnoses, which was completely unheard of. It was just like every time we turned around, the lab were coming down to us and saying, we have a new diagnosis, we have a new diagnosis. And we just couldn't believe it, you know, but that was a particular bumper year. But, you know, so we have on average about 12, 14 new patients a year. Sometimes it could be more, sometimes 18. And that particular year, I think it was 23 patients. So they're born with different degrees of severity. So some of them will have classical PKU. And I suppose we are lucky in the metabolic unit because we do test each patient for their genetics. So we know their genetic profile. So when it came to looking at the patients who we thought might respond to Kuvan, we were at an advantage above some other centres that deal with PKU, because we were able to look at the genetics for each and every one of our patients, which gave us some insight as to whether or not they would or wouldn't, or may not respond to Kuvan or BH4. However, I know Maria alluded to this before, that you know, the number of exchanges that somebody is on is not, we thought would be indicative as to whether or not somebody would respond to Kuvan, but in actual fact, it's not. You know, you have to put that aside, because, you know, with Lola, if we'd looked at Lola and said she's only on 4 exchanges, we would have said the chances are she won't respond. But then you look at the genetics and you say, well, there is a chance that she could respond. And then when we tested her, she did respond, you know. So, you know, we are lucky that we have that kind of foresight, that we can then test the patients on paper that look like, looking at the exchanges, will not respond, and then, but actually they do respond. So, like I said, diet is a fantastic means of treatment. And, you know, for all those people that don't respond to Kuvan, you do have diet, even though it can be very, very restrictive. And hopefully, you know, in the not too distant future, there will be other forms of treatment that will help with their control and will allow a more liberal diet. But just to go back, the likes of Lola won't know, but years ago there was this bread. It used to come in a tin. Okay, could you imagine opening a tin and there was bread in it? Okay, so it was made by SHS, and I remember they decided. I think it wasn't, they didn't decide themselves. I think that the company that was manufacturing it for them were changing their procedures, and they no longer were able to can the bread. So they had to abolish it and come up with other methods of providing bread. So they came up with the vacuum packed bread, and we all thought this was brilliant. You know, it's, you know, a bread. I remember being in college, and we used to have to do cookery sessions, you know, learn how to cook with low protein foods, learn how to, you know, deal with a gluten-free diet, or deal with all different aspects of diets. Okay, and I remember doing our low protein session and opening a can of bread and thinking this is the most bizarre thing ever. But the SHS had to discontinue it, and there was absolute uproar. Oh my gosh, it was like somebody had died in all the PKU families because
I've heard so many adults talk about the tinned bread. I think everybody's heard about the tinned bread.
Yes,
It's
yes,
absolutely
and it was
part of PKU history for sure.
It was so badly missed. Now we've moved on, and I suppose people have got over it. But it was, yeah, it was one of those things that will never be forgotten by our older cohort of patients. The tin bread. Lola, you're lucky you didn't ever have to have it. It was circular, and it was very well. It was very white. It was yeah, it was bizarre.
I'm seeing some comments and questions coming through in the chat, and I'm just getting conscious of time. But in with regards to Kuvan, did you have would you say there was a good response rate, more than probably what you would have anticipated?
Yeah, and I think Maria already said, you know, because we had the genetics, we were able to kind of look to see who's more likely to respond and who isn't. So I suppose to start off with, we did identify patients that not all. I mean, we also thought, you know, what families are really struggling with diet and how, you know, could they benefit from Kuvan? If there was a glimmer of hope that they could respond, we certainly tested those families as well. And unfortunately, some didn't respond. But yes, we have had a higher than expected response to Kuvan, which has been fantastic. You know, and we, you know, to various degrees as well, you know, the likes of Lola, who's gone from 4 to 17 exchanges. And then we've got another girl who's gone from 28 exchanges, which sounds like a load. She was on load to start off with. She's now on normal diet. She's not on any synthetic protein. She doesn't have to count protein. She can eat as much as she wants. But, you know, that in itself creates its own problems. I mean, she was a fussy eater. She found it really, really difficult to eat the exchanges. You know, she was forcing herself to eat because she had to get all this protein in that she wasn't used to eating. So it introduces its own challenges in its, you know, going from that. And then we have another family that they've gone from kind of 16 to 18 to 50, 60 exchanges. Again, you know, we didn't expect the response, but then we've got other families who've gone from, say, 4 to 12, you know, so it really has varied, you know, quite a lot, you know.
And that 4 to 12 could be really hugely significant for one family.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, in the same way a 12 to a whatever would
yes,
be for
absolutely.
I think it's really important to recognize it's really perspective, isn't it, and where people are coming from. So somebody might be on 17 and still struggle with 17 exchange.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I just wanted to add in also, you know, the we as a dietetic department, we went from one member of staff that Maria mentioned when Dr. Nocton was here, you know, when they first set up the unit, and you know, now we have 8 whole-time equivalents. We do need more, particularly with the rollout of Kuvan, we're on a go slow at the moment with regards to Kuvan because of staff shortages, but we hope to get that sorted pretty soon so we can get back up and running with that Kuvan testing again. But other things that we've done, you know, we've produced a cookbook for, you know, parents who are weaning their child on a PKU diet. I think most families would have seen our Penny and Paul book that was written by our play therapist and Jenny, our dietitian. You know, they wrote and Penny and Paul, and then it was adapted for all the other protein metabolic conditions as well. So there's one for maple syrup and HCU and glutaric aciduria. So it's great that we've been able to adapt that across the different protein conditions. You know, so, you know, I think as a unit, you know, we've done a lot. You know, Maria talked about the health curriculum, and it has allowed us to do group sessions with kids. You know, having the PKU clinic exclusive to PKU has meant that we've been able to group kids together and do sessions with them. But unfortunately, with COVID and that has put a stop to a lot of things. But like Maria said earlier, you know, the Attend Anywhere, I think, has opened up a new methodology for us to see patients remotely, and it does. And I think Hazel, you would agree with us here that, you know, for families, it's a huge thing for you as well, Bernadette. You know, a round trip to Temple Street could take, you know, 7-8 hours. You know, and that's a lot of driving in one day. So I think, you know, for families, you know, if you can cut down one visit a year by doing an attend anywhere appointment, that in itself will help our families.
We do get excited about seeing you too, though.
Oh yeah, good.
Absolutely.
And you know, another thing I wanted to mention.
You do build very strong relationships with staff over the years,
Absolutely.
you know, and
You know,
it means so much coming into Temple Street, and the lovely warm welcome you get on a first name basis every time you walk in the door from all members of staff is absolutely, it's fabulous. You're an inspiration. And actually in the chat, a 29-year-old has commented how much she misses you all in Temple Street. So, you know, so you obviously, you know, you've left a long lasting impression. But like you've mentioned as well, you know, adult care, it is one of the areas for us in the PKU Association, we're advocating to help to support, particularly our adult community. And
it's getting better though.
It's getting better. But yeah, I just seen a question coming through about the increased funding for you, Maria Regan, in 1999. They're wondering, was there an individual group or government policy change? Was there any lobbying behind that one? And that's an interesting question.
It's an interesting one, actually. There was a baby unit in Dublin, apparently called St. Ultan's, and it had been, you know, closed. It wasn't any longer functioning, but the property was being sold, and they held a competition, an essay competition, for the distribution of the funds. And Dr. Nocton wrote an essay.
Yes, she did.
Yeah, wrote an essay and won a considerable amount of money, which allowed for the development of the services. And I think that was matched by the government in relation to then saying, okay, we need further staffing here. So it was a bit of a thing. It was a private sort of enterprise, but that is why the metabolic outpatients is called St. Ultan's. I don't know if anybody's ever noticed the name up over the door, but that's actually why it's called St. Ultan's. So it was both.
Maria, did you know that the screening, the newborn screening, was going to be given to the blood transfusion service of Ireland? Did you know that?
No.
It was originally, okay, but it was the Minister for Health at the time felt it was really inappropriate for them to take on the service because it was Temple Street that had lobbied to get the service up and running. So they said, no, it's to be put into Temple Street and not the National Transfusion Service of Ireland. There we go. Or the blood transfusion service, yeah.
Yes.
We're learning a lot tonight.
Yeah.
I tell you.
There's just there's a lot of comments coming through thanking Temple Street staff, thanking Anne, thanking Lola and Hazel, let's not forget Mom, and also to Fergus, our retiring chairperson as well. An interesting comment here, every Irish student should spend a day visiting Temple Street as part of their curriculum to give them perspective. I'm sure they do, and I think within the rare disease community generally, it's and I see Suja, Dr. Suja Salmanadin from UCD PPI Ignite is actually attending tonight as well, and she's done a huge amount of work around rare disease and PKU and PPI work, and just to acknowledge her as well. But you know, she is very much around educating and trying to educate, I suppose, medical and health professionals in the area of rare disease as well through her academic work. And just as I mentioned PPI work, a few of the words that have come through, if I was to summarize, you know, I've been jotting down keywords throughout the discussion tonight, and collaboration has actually popped up a few times. So collaboration, particularly the importance of collaborations between the PKU community and healthcare professionals in moving forward. And, you know, the importance of sharing lived experience, you know, to document lived experience to help to support healthcare professionals and the PKU community for further improvements and for future developments in PKU. So it's really important that we get more involvement as well from our community to help to support everybody in the care and management of PKU, not just in Ireland, but elsewhere as well. Does anybody have any last final points they'd like to make before we wrap it up for tonight?
Sorry, Bernadette, there's actually 2 questions in the Q&A as well. Just make sure you check them.
Apologies, I missed that. Sorry, and then I'll come to you, Maria.
Okay, I just want to say one thing, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a question here. Is there a cutoff age for Kuvan trials given the movement of patients to the matter and the age profile that Temple Street can treat? There's one question there.
Okay, well, yeah, the answer to that one would be in the negotiations with the health minister, etc., in relation to how we were going to establish whether or not somebody responded to Kuvan. The idea of admitting patients only, I suppose it only relates to children. It wouldn't be possible to admit patients, adult patients, to an adult hospital to do the same. So when the Mater service is within the, I suppose when they have the facility to start the Kuvan testing, it can be done as an outpatient, whereas for the children, it has to be done as an inpatient. So there isn't a cutoff in relation to being tested for it. However, at the moment, there's, I suppose, a cutoff in relation to who needs to come into hospital for it and who can be done as an outpatient.
So,
but I suppose the thing to remember though, Bernadette, sorry Maria, the thing to remember is it's not just straightforward. It's not a case of just giving you some tablets to send you home to try it out. So that's why there is a limitation to what the Mater can do at the minute. There's a lot of things that you actually have to fulfill before you get to the point of giving it. And then there's the testing and the follow-up. So I think I would just ask that everybody just be a little bit patient with us in relation to, one, getting the children in. Everybody will have the opportunity that wants the opportunity to be tested, but it just will take some time. And in relation to the adults, it will be something that is offered. It's just a case of when.
And I think when the adults are done, it'll be done through a different protocol to what we are doing in Temple Street at the moment, okay? And I suppose our cutoff age in Temple Street is 18. Most services, you can't say you can't attend A&E beyond the age of 16, but for special services, so Metabolic would fall into that remit, you have to be under the age of 18 to be admitted. So we can't do anybody over that age.
There's another question in the Q&A, and it's, what about those who do not respond to Kuvan? Is it likely that PEG-PAL will be introduced for children in Ireland in the next few years?
Okay, so, the thing with PEG-PAL is it is only licensed for adults at the moment. It is not licensed for children. And I think, you know, I think everything that's in the development process will, you would think, be offered at one point or another, but it's just a case of how quickly it will be licensed for children. I think they have now moved to testing in a younger cohort. I'm actually not sure what the cutoff point for that age group is. I would think it's probably only about 14 or 16.
We lost Maria there, I think. So the cutoff for Kuvan is 16, over 16. So Maria, you said that you had one more
I just wanted
point to make.
Just that Hazel had said, you know, about, you know, the lack of, or she would love that there would be more foods, low protein foods available. I don't know if you've heard yet, but Nestle, who own Vitaflow, have bought out Mavalia. So hopefully some of those, they will be lobbying the GMS. So hopefully some of those products will be available in the future. But how far into the future, I have no idea. So that's up to Vitaflow to do all the legwork with the HSE to get those foods approved. But we're hoping that sometime down the future, there will be more foods available.
That's fantastic, yeah.
And I just wanted to mention also our storeroom. I mean, we have kids who come to the metabolic unit who get very excited because that room contains only low protein foods, and it's like going into their own little shop, as it's been described by some of our visitors to the unit, and they love going to our store cupboard so they can pick out foods that they can bring home with them.
I just seen a message in the chat from the company who's involved in that food product. So they said, yes, we will. We hope to submit to GMS ASAP. So there's another reason to celebrate an International PKU Day. So fantastic. Lots of great things happening. So just does anybody want to make a final message before we're wrapping up? I think we've just a few minutes left. Anything else?
It'd be good to acknowledge as well the fact that the food companies do put on cookery demonstrations and, you know, days out, and, you know, just to, you know, to help the families. You know, I know that the cookery demonstrations are invaluable. So if you have never been to one and get the chance to go to one, I would strongly recommend that you do.
Thank you. And any last words?
Just to say,
Lola?
just to say thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a real privilege to be listening to your discussions and to know how far the services have come. I know there's a long way to go yet, but it's wonderful to hear everything. And that I will pass on all this to Sheila's family, who I'm in touch with, because I know they will be delighted to know about everything that's going on here. So thank you.
Thank you. And Lola, any last words?
Thank you.
You're a celebrity now in our community.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And Maria Regan is back with us again. So Maria, we have 1 minute left if you want to say one last message.
No, I'm terribly sorry. I don't know. I think I was hit by the cyber attack or something. No, I just want to say well done, Bernadette. This has been a really lovely event, and it's been lovely to be involved with it. And I also just wanted to very, very quickly thank the PKU Association, because when we did have our cyber attack, we had no phones, no computers. We were completely shut down. We had no way of contacting. I think Karen Willits was probably had a headache from me because we had so many conversations. But thank you so much for helping us to get our message out to all.
And thank you to each and every one of you at home listening tonight, and to all of our speakers. And I want to wish everybody from the PKU Association of Ireland who are listening around the world, we want to wish you a very happy International PKU Day from Ireland. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.